as I'm watching a cowboy pull an card out of a weather station. These guys are struggling to use Square at the farmer's market. And I'm like, food and ag, 10% of the world's economy. How hard could this be?
Coming up on the pod, we're talking to Chris Taylor and Rob Trice of the Mixing Bowl, all about AgTech, biologicals, and their famous industry landscape maps.
Hi, it's been about 10 days since you welcomed baby number 3 into the world. We got on the call and I was a little bit shocked. Like, you're looking a little bit worse for the wear, a little tired. How are you feeling these days, Ty?
I mean, 3 kids, a newborn, all of the things. I think it's easier. Our 2 older girls, they're older, they're 5 and 6. And so, we don't have a toddler running around. And that's, I think, a unique kind of crazy that you just went through. I went through a few years ago of having a newborn and a toddler. This hits different because the 2 girls are in school. And so getting them out the door in the mornings and doing pickups and drop-offs while also having a newborn, it is quite the roller coaster. I am quite tired, but I was just showing you before we jumped on, I have been drinking coffee nonstop, cold brew, but I have to change it up from cold brew because I'm consuming so much coffee that right now I have an iced Americano that is treating me really nice.
Nice. Yeah, you got to throw the body some curveballs and mix it up sometimes and get an iced Americano in there.
Black cold brew to black iced Americano, like huge variation in my coffee choices.
It's crazy when we started this podcast, 0 kids, now there's 5 between us. That's crazy.
Very crazy. But yeah, happy and healthy mom and baby. So excited about that. Well, Tim, I'm super excited for this conversation with Rob and Chris of the Mixing Bowl. You may know of them through their viral, famous industry landscape maps, and they take different categories within AgTech. They've done robotics. They've spent a lot of time on biologicals recently, and help classify and categorize the various companies that are out there in the space to make sense of who's doing what. Really helpful documents to see. And Tim, I think the biological landscape map was really inspiring to us when we launched AgList, because we saw them take something that was confusing, this mess of companies and who does what. And we said, hey, let's do something similar, but more on the product side, and kind of adding this component of letting farmers vote and endorse products that work for them, make sense of all the products underneath those companies. And so we're really excited to announce a new collaboration with the Mixing Bowl on their biological biostimulant landscape map that we're going to announce in our conversation. So a little teaser for you. This conversation is really wide ranging. We talk about AgTech trends and investing and how the Mixing Bowl, how they work with the industry and on the consulting end of things. So a lot of really interesting topics, and Chris and Rob's background you guys are going to really enjoy.
We'll drop you into the conversation with what's top of mind, but first, a word from our sponsors.
The Modern Acre podcast is presented by American Ag Credit. American Ag Credit is a proud member of the Farm Credit System, which was created more than 100 years ago with the sole purpose of serving the financial needs of farmers and ranchers. From small farms to the largest agribusiness enterprises, American Ag Credit understands agriculture and how to structure customized financial solutions. Just like many of the guests we have on the pod, American Ag Credit recognizes that the evolution of agriculture is inevitable and exciting. Their goal is to be at the forefront of this evolution, partnering with producers to grow their future in ways they haven't imagined yet. To learn more about American Ag Credit and to receive exclusive access to reports from Terrain, a research and insight service of American Ag Credit, visit agloan.com/terrain or hit the link in our show notes. Chris, Rob, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
We're excited to chat with you, learn more about everything that you're working on. But before we jump into everything, let's learn a little bit more about each of you, like what led you into agriculture, your legends in the space, doing investing. You've been around for a long time. So maybe talk us about the origin story. Maybe, Rob, you jump in first.
Yeah, so I am not an ag kid. My origin story and how I got into agri-food tech, I did about 15 years in mobile internet telecom venture capital. And honestly, it was really exciting when I started doing mobile investing. We were trying to figure out how to put maps and email and this exciting new technology called Wi-Fi onto phones. It was cool, but that was on 2G networks. When people started talking about 5G, I just don't have 5G in me. I've been going to the same conferences, talking to the same wonderful people about the same content, and I was just ready for a change. And so, in the meantime, my wife had left her job at Stanford and started running a regenerative cattle ranch out in Pescadero, California. And I literally was walking around this ranch trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up and thinking about the fact that Uber disrupted transportation, Airbnb disrupted lodging, and thinking about what other staid industries might Silicon Valley try to go digitize. As I'm watching a cowboy pull an card out of a weather station, these guys are struggling to use Square at the farmer's market. And I'm like, food and ag. 10% of the world's economy. How hard could this be? It's the least digitized market in the world. And so that was just about 11 years ago or so. Two organizations back then, the Mixing Bowl, that we'll talk more about today, that connects IT, food, and ag innovators for thought and action leadership. And then also Better Food Ventures, that makes investments into companies applying information technology across the food and ag value chain to make a positive impact now.
Chris, we'll move over to you. Tell us how you your journey, your origin story here.
Okay. I'm also not an ag kid, though my family is from southern Illinois, soy and corn country, and had been for 150 years. So maybe there's something in the DNA. So I'm also came from the tech side, mechanical and manufacturing engineering by training. Went straight into the software industry, really focused around product and product-oriented roles, product program, development management, really all about market discovery and solutions innovation. So that was in design automation, manufacturing, healthcare. Interest in ag long term, always growing stuff at a hobby level, kind of have a micro farm at this point. And was several years ago now looking for something on the sustainability side. An old friend of mine, Michael Rose, who's our other partner at the Mixing Bowl, reached out and brought me on for a consulting project for a well-funded startup in the space. And one thing led to another, and I'm still here and doing advisory to startups, corporates, independent organizations on all kinds of things. The Mixing Bowl focuses on whether it's market, technology, partnership, innovation strategy, et cetera. One of the more visible things that we do and that I personally have been a part of are our market landscapes that people may have seen. Got a number of these on indoor ag, climate smart ag. I was worked on crop robotics ones and 3 biological ones. So that brings me to date.
I love it. Okay, there's so much to get in here. Rob, let's go back to you. I mean, I think that 11 years ago, you said you got into this ag tech investing space, and boy, has it been a crazy, a crazy decade. You have seen the ups and the downs and all the way around. Like, talk us through those early days. Like, I think that was very early on. There was a ton of momentum a decade ago around ag tech as the next kind of big investing area, and there was a lot of funds that were kind of materialized around that time. Like, talk us through those early days, and like, I'd love to just take a peek into that time of ag tech.
Yeah, a couple different things. On the investment side, I was interested in getting to a space where there was a moat, right? You couldn't just walk in and create an app and then, because we had seen social, viral, we had seen ad tech, you could just kind of step into pretty easily. I liked food and agriculture because there is a barrier to entry. You got to know what you're investing in. I didn't know the space. And so part of the Mixing Bowl, self-centeredly, we created an event. We arguably did the very first agri-food tech event in Silicon Valley at Stanford, 11 years ago. And we threw this thing together in 3 months. I think we had like 250, 300 people show up. It was just crazy. Climate had just gotten acquired by Monsanto. So there was like interest in the space. But literally that conference was trying to figure out what we now call agri-food tech, right? So and we had a guy named Chris Patterson up from Canada. He came up to me after this conference. He said, I got something to say to you about this conference. I'm like, oh no, this guy knows I'm a fraud. And he said, I go to all these ag tech events, but this is the first time I've talked to a chef. And he had talked to this fantastic woman who's local here called Jessie Cool. And it was a different kind of conversation because you're now looking at the supply chain. At any rate, long story short is we hated running around asking for sponsorship. We didn't want to charge too much for ticket prices. And everybody and their uncle was doing an AgTech event. So we backed out of that space. And we had always been doing, our former colleagues, Shauna Day, Britta Rosenheim, who had done these landscaping, the early landscape analyses. And so we started to really think that that's where we could add value to the ecosystem. One other thing I just want to say, we put a slide up in 2014 at that Stanford event. We said the purpose of the mixing bowl is fourfold: see issues, seek solutions, solve problems, and scale solutions. And one of the things I'm thinking about today is my frustration that 80% of the effort of this ecosystem, the agri-food tech, is still seeing issues and seeking solutions. 20% is solving and scaling. And we need to flip that. We're not making progress like we need to.
Rob, I love the combination of having the mixing bowl, doing kind of this research, insights, putting out the content, and then having the investment arm as well. I think a lot of folks we talk to are kind of like one lane or the other. And I think that there is a lot of synergy by having these two parts, like Ty and I talk about with the podcast, having the podcast benefits the farm and AgList and other projects that we're working on. So really cool to see you guys take that approach super early on, 11 years ago, incorporating kind of that content flywheel. So maybe just talk to us a little bit. Maybe Chris, you can jump in on kind of the strategy of how these two businesses kind of play off each other with the Mixing Bowl and Better Food Ventures.
I think I'm going to have to defer to Rob since he's much more involved on the investment side with the Better Food Ventures.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there are other players in the space like AgFunder, as AgFunder News, Tenacious Ventures, and Sarah Nolet, the great work that they do. They have content, they have investing. For us, it's really important to me to make sure that if I'm talking to you, you know what hat I'm wearing. Am I talking from an investor's hat or another one? And that there's a bit of a Chinese wall between those two. Because if we're mapping out the robotic space, I want you to feel confident I'm not picking your pocket to go inform my portfolio company about what you're doing, right? And so there is a little bit of a trust required to make that happen, but at least I'm going to be transparent about this is the hat I'm wearing. This is my intention when I'm entering into a conversation with you. So that's why we kept them as two distinct brands, for better or for worse. The way it informs us is, I've got a great story. Chris was working on our indoor AgTech landscape, and we called up a company to basically say, hey, are you out of business? The company's called Four Growers, and they harvest tomatoes, cucumbers, and they're like, no, we're not out of business. We ended up investing in that company. We would not have found Four Growers if not for the fact that we were taking a deep dive and really doing this landscape analysis. So it gives us the headspace to think about where a market is going or a particular technology, but then also an opportunity to identify specific companies we might want to invest in.
It makes a ton of sense. I think that being engaged in the industry and in market analysis, and then ultimately in investing, just puts you at the forefront of the innovation happening in the space. It gets you in those conversations about what people are doing, how things are going. Chris, let's jump into more into detail these landscape maps. These have become lore in the ag tech space. Seeing these landscape maps come out every year or so. Talk us through your process and one, how do you come up with what categories to focus on or what verticals to focus on, and then walk us through the process a bit.
Yeah, well, usually we'll have a sector in mind, a vertical, if you will, in mind. And that's often sort of what's at the forefront of the industry right at that point in time. So we did the indoor ag ones, the CEA ones, sort of at the peak of that, or really even pre-peak, and then robotics, and more recently biologicals, which is obviously gaining a lot of traction right now. But then once you get below that, that's really where the hard work comes out. Rob mentioned Four Growers. As we're digging down at the company level, that's a classic example. You can't tell. We're basing things on public information in large part, and just being able to tell when companies are alive or not alive and what's really their status at any given moment. You got to read through all the marketing hype if there is marketing hype. But yeah, the 4 growers one was classic because we really couldn't tell whether they were still alive. They'd gone into stealth, and it was just a timing thing. Right when we were trying to make a call on them, found that they were then coming out of stealth and had some great technology. So you never know. But we do a lot of hard work digging into the companies and the sectors themselves, because building up our own expertise as we go. As far as the segmentation goes, a lot of that is not preconceived. We may have a general idea, but I tend to even push that as late as possible in the process and have it come out of the data, out of the look at the market. We're going company by company here. In the case of biostimulants, there's a gazillion companies out there, so that's a pretty onerous process. And then just figuring out what actual products there are, what's really in the market or close to market, and what ingredients they're using. In the case of biostimulants, because the landscape itself is kind of broken down by major ingredient categories. But it very much is dependent, again, on the specific sector and the data and how the companies kind of have arranged themselves. Some sectors it's easier, more obvious, maybe robotics being one. People tend to focus on one thing versus something like biostimulants where companies have portfolios of products and they're really spanning a large part of the space.
Chris, we met a few months back at the Salinas Summit, the Biological Summit. You gave a presentation on kind of the latest biostimulant landscape map, and maybe just talk us through like parts of that presentation on kind of some of the key takeaways and observations that you made creating the landscape map. And I know you also put out a piece recently with AgFender talking about the investment side. So maybe just talk to us some kind of high-level takeaways on biostimulants particularly.
Yeah, I loved it that you grabbed my one quote, the something along the lines of "I pity the poor farmers who have to wade through this." I was kind of talking about the market in general, but I think it applied to the landscape as well because it's pretty dense.
Oh, it's the market in general for sure. Like that was like, yeah, something that when Ty and I started following the space of like there's hundreds and hundreds of these companies, as you know, and it's like just so challenging for growers to navigate.
Yeah, it really is. It's and much more so than the other landscape areas that I've been involved in. More than 2 years ago, we were kind of recruited, I guess, by DeFlock with Western growers to create a landscape because we'd done previous landscapes that he was aware of for the Salinas Biological Summit, and it was a quick hit. But we dove into the biological space. We're a little awed by again the number of companies and just the lack of clarity when it came to terminology and where people really are bucketed on claims as well. Still, we produced landscape. It was well received. And I think one thing that came out of that was the drivers for this biological momentum aren't going away. Whether that's chemical free preference, regulations, pest resistance, more stressful growing conditions, et cetera. So all that was continuing to push things forward. And the market was growing quickly, still really early. It seemed like even though some products have been around for decades. Then last year we did the biocontrol landscape. So we really wanted to drill down a bit deeper. And because the first landscape was pretty cursory, very high level. So we focused on biocontrol first for no other reason maybe than it was a little more clear, more regulated, and a little more organized. So maybe it was the easier one to go after. Created a landscape with 13 segments organized by pest and ingredients. And so we got to drill in quite a bit deeper. One thing we found there that a lot of the companies were offering products in multiple segments, and that's on that landscape, there is this big bucket of folks with broader portfolios, which was a little different than our previous landscapes. We tend to put one company on our landscapes one time. So folks that might be in multiple categories, we still try to put them in their most logical place. And that was a particular challenge on the biological ones. So this year, we moved on to biostimulants, the wild west of biologicals, probably, if you will. So all the products really enhancing or activating plants' natural processes. So other than supplying nutrients directly like fertilizers or targeting pests like the biocontrol landscape focused on. So in this case, two things. The organization I think was difficult. But again, we ended up with, at least a dozen product-oriented categories. But in this case, actually, two much larger buckets, one on substances, so non-living biostimulants, and the other on living biostimulants. And then where those crossed, which are companies with very mixed portfolios that are drawing from all these different ingredient categories. In this case, this bucket was, I think, 60% or so and of the whole. So again, people with very broad portfolios using a lot of different ingredients. I say a lot of different ingredients. In this case, the ingredient set is actually pretty limited. Most of the biostimulants are drawn from seaweed extracts or other botanical extracts, amino acids, and then, specific bacteria and fungi, or fungi if you prefer. I heard one of you say that on one of your podcasts. And so it's an interesting place. And there's a lot of companies, kind of a lack of differentiation because of this limited set of ingredients. Feels very repetitive and, again, hard to wade through for the folks out there trying to select product. We ended up with 350 companies on the landscape in this last one, although there's many more out there. The landscapes, biological ones in general, are very representative rather than comprehensive. And again, there's a lot to wade through. But hopefully the landscapes help with that. There's been tremendous reaction to this biostimulant landscape in particular. And so I just think there's a need out there for information and help wading through products. We don't even touch efficacy, which is a huge part of it, trying to figure out what actually works for folks. If only there were a website could help with that, with real stories from real users of these products.
It makes a ton of sense. This is what we saw as well, right? Like and we saw firsthand as farmers, right? We're really interested in the area of regenerative agriculture and how does this work on our farm doing vegetables in the Central Valley. And this is not commodity crop Midwest regenerative agriculture. And one of the things that really made a lot of sense to us that was, manageable was, hey, can we explore using biological products to supplement, not necessarily 100% replace, but supplement and transition to more biological based solutions and inputs. And so we've been testing on our farm and seeing what works. And it's overwhelming. You don't know how a farmer typically finds out about biologicals from their local retailer, PCA, or their farmer next door will recommend something and maybe give it a try. But there's not a ton of proactive opportunity for farmers to just make sense of it. And that's really kind of where our idea for AgList kind of came from, is how can we actually bring the farmer experience into this craziness of biologicals. And I think we very quickly realized, hey, you guys are doing an incredible job creating these landscapes, organizing these companies that are a mess. And as we thought about building up AgList to really be a Yelp for agriculture, how can we organize that information and take it the next step, right? To where growers can search for specific products and their use cases and their crops and their geography. And so we're actually very super excited to announce a collaboration together. It's a collab that everyone needed. Mixing Bowl and AgList coming together and working on having the landscape map be interactive with AgList, which is super exciting. So we're excited to share that to the world and just appreciate your guys' partnership on it. But now those logos that you see on the landscape map are interactive. So you can go and see what that company has to offer and the products that they have on AgList, which is super exciting to see.
Absolutely. And it'll be fun to see where it goes from here in terms of, getting it out there, getting that reaction to different products. And clearly the voice of the farmer and the farmer reaction to these products has been much needed, and it'll be invaluable to now add that to the conversation.
Yeah, we can only go so far with a one-page market landscape. And there's so much more complexity for the growers, even beyond what the technology providers are, I think, worried about, at least day to day. Your specific crops, application methods, efficacy, of course, compatibility with the rest of the operation, cost. And I think the big one, which falls really solely on the producer side, is risk. There's only so much you can take on. And I think that's true for the whole AgTech space, and the tech providers need to be aware of. You guys are farmers, so you're probably getting hit on all sides from folks wanting you to try their latest and greatest, but you have to do it in a sane manner that's not going to disrupt your business.
Totally. That was like one of our observations as well. Like when I came back to the family farm in late 2022, I'm just getting flooded with inbound messages on LinkedIn and DMs of just like, try this product, free trial, free trial. And like, even with a free trial, like there's time consumed to manage those trials. And so like we've had to say no to a lot of just free opportunities to try stuff just because we're constrained on what we can manage on the farm to actually execute a really good trial with the right control and have the bandwidth to do so. So we hope kind of AgList helps bridge the gap to kind of get the information more broadly out there. Like your point, Rob, about like more information is better for the industry, better for everyone. So hopefully this partnership helps push the needle forward. Rob, I wanted to dig back into the investment side real quick. Like you've done a lot of work around biologicals on the biocontrol, biostimulants. Have you made any investments in biologicals? Like, curious your thoughts, like from an investment perspective in the category.
So we have not, and that's fundamentally we don't invest in things we don't really understand. Now with Chris and the landscape, we understand these things. But I will tell you that, like, as somebody kind of walking in off the street, going to that Salinas Ag Biological Summit, I'm scared. And I look at like the lack of differentiation, the lack of, well, how crowded this market is, right? I mean, exactly what we're talking about. How many different products are out there knocking on your doors and other farmers' doors? I think this is a hard market, right? Just as in terms of a startup and having to get the efficacy, the trials, certifications, some sort of go to market strategy and a partnership, and then also a lot of things you were talking about in terms of like having the farmer understand the risks, being comfortable with that, and then the other thing I'll say, I was down with Shane Thomas and some other folks in Brazil. We went to a big, massive 800,000 acre farm. And one of the last stops we made was to their biological factory, right? They are making their own home brew, right? I don't know where they got the formula, probably from some local university. But basically, this farmer was saying, I don't want to pay big Northern Hemisphere input companies high prices. And so there's a homebrew community down there for 800,000 acre farm. This is one of 12 farms that they had. One of them was 800,000 acres, right? So if he's doing that, how am I going to make money as a startup on that? I'm not saying that there won't be successes, but again, we don't invest in things we don't understand. And this one, just it's a hard space to understand.
I think you hit on a ton of good points, and is even circling back to I think one of your initial comments around moat, right? Is that it's an incredibly fragmented industry, and so I think there is opportunity here for sure. It needs to be some sort of step level change in technology, right? Where you have some proprietary technology. It's not just rinsing and repeating the same kind of ingredient or methodology. And then two is brand, building a strong brand that's compelling, that is differentiated. And then three is distribution, right? Of how do you actually get in front of farmers, right? And so it's either one of those has to be a step level game changer, or a combination of all three. But what I expect, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, is there's going to be some consolidation in the space, or someone to execute a roll up strategy of these various products, because you have a fragmented industry with varying branding and messaging and varying approaches to distribution. If you can bring some of these groups together, there could be a 1+1 equals 3 effect. So that would be my prediction, is that we see some consolidation or roll ups happening in this space.
Yes, and how do you make sure that you are the belle of the ball that gets, the magic golden ticket and gets acquired, right? When there are so many other companies out there also trying to get that golden ticket, right? And there's going to be a lot of companies that just don't make it in this space. When you step back and you look at this, is again part of my education, is what it requires to actually build a brand and a supportive channel to get to customers and support customers. That's a lot of money that you're throwing down. It reminds me, a lot of folks may not understand this, but like in venture capital, I'm a digital monkey. I look at digital stuff and apps and, semiconductors and so forth historically. I went to a VC poker game and I was sitting next to a guy who did medical devices and drugs. Completely different approach to venture capital, right? Where these guys, they make bets, and they're going to have a digital outcome. It's either going to get approved and acquired, or it's going to fail. And when I look at the biologics, it's much more like the drug discovery than it is a digital play. And I don't know if a lot of investors understand that, honestly, when they're making these investments. It's like, what it's going to take to play all 9 innings of this game and get this company to a successful outcome. So I don't know. Maybe there are certainly some smart investors in this space, but I worry that a lot of folks are just kind of jumping in without looking before they're leaping.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the next few years go. Like for all the categories of ag, it seems like there's been a lot of activity on the M&A front and a lot more kind of corporate venture on the biological side with kind of the big input manufacturers that are, making small bets where they have kind of the inside peek on what's happening that they could potentially fold into their portfolio in the future and kind of have that optionality. So it's going to be a interesting time seeing this unfold. And Rob, wanted to kind of close with talking about the industry in general. What other categories are you excited about? Like what is interesting you as an investor these days?
This is my least favorite question. I honestly, like, the beginning of the year, if you would have asked me this question, I couldn't have answered it. And I'm still struggling too. But, I was a little bit of an Eeyore in January. And then February 1st, we had 5 entrepreneurs who walked in off the street. We ended up doing 2 deals. We just actually closed another deal that I can't announce, unfortunately, last week. But I don't think that I have a grand vision of where the space is going. I'm looking opportunistically at things that make sense. The bar is definitely high right now. For all of the reasons, I'll just tell you, for instance, we have 4 companies that are related to animal ag tech. And we just, things that we're quite proud of is 100% of the companies that we've invested in have gone on and done another round of financing, which is, and industry average is 40%. We're at 100%. And I thought we were actually going to have one that wasn't going to get it because there's the intersection of climate tech and animal ag tech. And we put that Venn diagram together of investors that really, on the climate tech, are either understand animal ag tech or supportive of animal ag tech, not alternative protein. And then those who really understand animal ag tech, it's tiny. And our lesson learned is, okay, we really need to understand what is the investor pool, which is shrinking generally for a follow-on investment in animal ag tech. And there just aren't going to be as many golden tickets, right? And to get those deals done. And it just, the tide is going out.
Chris, we'll wrap up with you. What's interesting and exciting for you? What are you seeing in the industry that you're thinking a lot about right now?
There's a couple things, or at least I know you ask about hot takes. I don't know if mine are hot takes, but maybe cold takes. Anyway, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, I think, in the current political, funding, regulatory climate. You guys did a podcast earlier this year on the Doge impacts on USDA. I thought that was great, very even keeled and very informative. It might be time for an update on that, actually. Related to this, I think, and especially with biologicals, we've still got so much to learn about the natural world. It's not just in ag. I mean, healthcare, et cetera. It seems like more and more microbiome, and the more we know, the less we know, or something. So I hate to see fundamental research take a hit as that eventually makes its way to the market over time. It's a long game here in ag, but so much is based on fundamental science. So I'd like to see that continue. For developers and investors, this is getting better, I think, but being realistic with regard to the agronomic time scale and the dollar and patience required in this particular space. And then to kind of that channel issue you hit in distribution, you got to differentiate yourself and you got to reach the market somehow. The channel's so entrenched in ag, I do see folks tend that consolidation happening to the big guys and, tending to use existing channels. It's hard to break out of that. I mentioned it earlier. I don't think the drivers in ag tech in general are going away, whether that's labor, climate, regulation, pest resistance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These aren't going down. And so new tools and techniques are going to be necessary to thrive going forward. And producers are just going to have to continue to be open and take on some level of the risk. And hopefully the rest of the industry shares a bit more of that. I'm personally cautiously optimistic. I'm definitely the Debbie Downer probably in our group, but I've got tempered optimism, mainly because we have to move forward on some of these technologies. So that's it.
Can I sneak one more thought in there about having to move forward? Because, you heard me talk about my frustration with this ecosystem and how we're not solving problems. And so I actually teamed up with a couple other troublemakers and launched a nonprofit with a terrible name that rolls right off the tongue, the Collaboratory for Open Software and Systems in Ag and Food, or COSAF. And fundamentally, what we're doing is we want to go leverage collective impact and also open source, open systems, because we feel like those are two innovation tools that those are limits we haven't squeezed hard enough for this space. And particularly with the funding climate being what it is, I think things are changing. And, kind of like what you guys are doing with AgList, as opposed to like this pushing technologies from, the 7,000 global incubators onto farmers. What if we actually had the farmers get together and say, hey, this is what we're looking for? One of my favorite stories is, a Walt Duflock story. The strawberry industry went to Cal Poly and said, hey, we want you to go create, I'll call it an open source standard implement to hole punch our strawberry plastic. And this is what the industry needs. It ain't rocket science. It ain't a venture capital opportunity, but this is where we are and what we need, right? And so the more that we can go solve these things, they're going to move the ball down the field inches, not yards. That's kind of where we're at right now. And so I'm looking more at this collective impact approach. I'm looking more at this open source because I think that that's going to allow us to set up a lot of the plumbing that will then unlock venture opportunities in the future. So for instance, you guys know we've got a data silo problem, right? And everybody wants to go unlock the magic fairy dust of AI for agriculture. Well, we don't get digitized, harmonized, machine readable data, we're never going to be able to unlock AI like we want to go solve large scale problems in agriculture like we need.
Super good points, and I think that's a good place to wrap it. We'll have the new landscape map linked in the show notes here. But as we wrap up, Rob and Chris, how can folks get a hold of you and connect with everything you're up to?
I'm at rob@mixingbowlhub.com.
And Chris at mixingbowlhub.com. And mixingbowlhub.com is our website, and the landscapes are there, and you can download high-res versions of them, which you'll need.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys both being on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
So, Ty, what do you think of the conversation with our new besties, Rob and Chris?
Great to have Rob and Chris on, and just it's been awesome to get to know them over the past few months, and their passion for the industry, Tim, I think is palpable, and just fun to talk to people that have been in the industry, that love it. They're never going to leave the industry, and they love the space of biologicals. And so we're super excited to announce this new feature we've helped build and make their landscape map now interactive. So check it out. The link is in the show notes to the interactive landscape map, biostimulant landscape map, where you can go and actually click on those logos and find information about those companies. And if they're on AgList, you can see their product level information and details. So check it out, play around with it. Let us know what you think. We're super excited to add this feature to AgList. And we mentioned a few weeks ago, we updated the pricing model for biological companies. So if you're a biological company listening, you can now get paid by us to get endorsements for your products. Talk about a win-win. Tim, I was super excited to launch both of these new updates to AgList recently.
Yeah, I think it's a really good model and a way to incentivize traction on the program. Like, users really like to see those growers' endorsements, and so this kind of helps incentivize both sides, where companies get credits back on their renewal for AgList by pushing and really trying to get endorsements. That's really helpful as people look at their products.
So be sure to check out aglist.com and sign up if you're a biological company. Check out the landscape map. Let us know what you think, and appreciate you guys listening and supporting.